You open your eyes in Imperial China and realize you have exactly 24 hours to live. Why? Because you've already broken 17 laws just by breathing. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the most unforgiving empire in human history. We're looking at the wrong person meant death, eating the wrong food meant poison, and wearing the wrong color meant treason. In the next few minutes, you'll discover why even the most careful modern person wouldn't survive a single day in this world of deadly etiquette and brutal justice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time you're listening to this. I love seeing where our community spans across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. It's dawn in the Forbidden City, and you're jolting awake on a thin mat in a servant's quarters. The year is 1750, during the Qing dynasty, and you've somehow found yourself as a lowly palace attendant. Your first instinct is to stretch and yawn, but that simple action could kill you. You see, the moment you stepped into the Imperial Palace, you entered a world where every gesture, every glance, every breath is governed by rules written in blood. The Forbidden City wasn't just the Emperor's home. It was a labyrinth of lethal protocol where a single misstep meant death by 1,000 cuts, or if you were lucky, a quick beheading. As you lie there in the pre-dawn darkness, you hear the shuffle of other servants beginning their day. These aren't just any servants, they're the survivors. The ones who've learned to move like ghosts, to keep their eyes downcast, to anticipate the Emperor's needs before he even has them. The palace employs over 9,000 people, but the turnover rate would make a modern HR department weep. Your first challenge? Getting dressed without committing treason. You reach for the simple brown robe laid out for you. But even this mundane act is fraught with danger. The color brown was specifically chosen for servants because wearing yellow, the imperial color, will be considered an act of rebellion punishable by death. Even the number of buttons on your robe has been carefully calculated. Too many, and you're accused of trying to outshine your betters. Too few, and you're deemed disrespectful. As you slip the robe over your head, you notice a tiny dragon embroidered near the hem. Your blood runs cold. Dragons were the exclusive symbol of the Emperor, and any unauthorized use was considered high treason. This could be a test, or it could be sabotaged by a rival servant. Either way, you're potentially looking at execution before breakfast. The sound of a gong echoes through the palace corridors, signaling the beginning of the daily routine. You have exactly 47 minutes to prepare the Emperor's morning tea service, and failure is an option. The last servant who was late to the tea ceremony was sentenced to bamboo beating, 100 strikes that left him unable to walk for weeks. You step into the corridor, and immediately you're faced with your next life or death decision. Which direction to look? The palace has strict rules about eye contact and sightlines. Looking directly at a member of the imperial family means instant death. Looking at a eunuch official the wrong way could earn you a flogging. Even looking at certain decorative elements is forbidden. The phoenix motifs are reserved for the Empress's gaze only. Historians still argue whether these extreme protocols were designed to maintain divine authority or simply to keep the enormous palace population in line through fear. What's certain is that they worked. Rebellion within the Forbidden City was virtually unheard of, not because of loyalty, but because of terror. As you navigate the maze-like corridors, you pass by windows that offer glimpses of the outside world. But even looking too long at the gardens below could be interpreted as laziness or, worse, as plotting an escape route. The palace walls weren't just designed to keep enemies out. They were designed to keep secrets in. And you, my friend, are now one of those secrets, bound by silence and tradition until the day you die. Your stomach growls, reminding you that you haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon. But breakfast isn't a given in the Imperial Palace. It's a privilege earned through perfect service and absolute obedience. And as you're about to discover, even the act of eating in Imperial China was a minefield of potentially fatal mistakes. The breakfast gong resonates through the palace, and your empty stomach clenches with both hunger and dread. In Imperial China, your morning meal isn't just sustenance. It's a potential death sentence served on fine porcelain. You shuffle toward the servants' dining hall, but first, you must navigate the emperor's breakfast preparation. As a palace attendant, you're required to assist in the elaborate ritual that surrounds the emperor's morning meal. This isn't just cooking, it's an exercise in paranoia that would make modern food safety inspectors faint. The imperial kitchen employs food tasters whose sole job is to die before the emperor does. These brave souls, or perhaps desperate individuals, sample every dish, every sauce, every grain of rice before it reaches the imperial table. The mortality rate among food tasters was so high that the position was often filled by prisoners already sentenced to death. It was considered a merciful alternative to immediate execution, though the mercy was debatable. You watch as the head cook carefully measures out the emperor's morning tea. Green tea was believed to promote longevity, but the emperor's tea contained something extra: mercury. Yes, mercury. The same stuff that would kill you in modern times was deliberately added to imperial beverages because ancient Chinese physicians believed it granted immortality. Historians still argue whether the emperors who died from mercury poisoning were victims of medical ignorance or subtle assassination, but the practice continued for centuries. The emperor's breakfast table resembles a chemistry lab more than a dining setup. Each dish is accompanied by a piece of silver, because silver was believed to turn black in the presence of poison. Never mind that silver only reacts to sulfur-based compounds and would be useless against most actual toxins. The psychological comfort was worth more than scientific accuracy. But here's where things get really interesting for you as a servant. You're not eating the emperor's food. You're getting the servant's breakfast, which somehow manages to be even more dangerous. The palace kitchens prepare different meals for different ranks, and the lower your status, the more creative the cooks get with questionable ingredients. Your bowl contains what appears to be rice porridge, but looks can be deceiving. The rice might be mixed with sawdust to stretch the portions, a common practice during lean times. The protein floating in your bowl could be rat, dog, or if you're really unlucky, something that died of disease. Food preservation in ancient China relied heavily on salt and fermentation, but the servants' quarters weren't exactly known for their adherence to food safety standards. You take a tentative sip of the porridge, and immediately your mouth burns. The cook has added cinnabar, a mercury sulfide mineral prized for its bright red color and supposed medicinal properties. In small doses, it was thought to boost energy and improve circulation. In larger doses, it causes kidney failure and death. The servants never knew which dose they were getting. The other servants around you eat in silence, not just because talking during meals was forbidden, but because many of them were slowly dying from cumulative poison exposure. Lead-glazed pottery was common in palace kitchens, and chronic lead poisoning caused everything from abdominal pain to mental deterioration. Many servants who were punished for stupidity or clumsiness were actually suffering from heavy metal toxicity. As you force down another spoonful, you notice a sweet taste beneath the burning spice. Sugar was rare and expensive in Imperial China, so this sweetness comes from something else: honey, perhaps, or more likely, lead acetate, known as sugar of lead. This compound was sometimes used to sweeten wine and food. It tastes pleasant, but causes severe lead poisoning over time. The servant next to you suddenly doubles over, clutching his stomach. This isn't unusual. Digestive distress was a daily occurrence in the palace. Between the questionable ingredients, the heavy metals, and the constant stress of potential execution, the servant's mortality rate from natural causes was staggeringly high. But food poisoning wasn't always accidental. Palace politics were vicious, and poisoning rivals was considered a legitimate career advancement strategy. The cook's assistant might slip something extra into a particular servant's bowl if they'd been promised a promotion by a higher-ranking official. Arsenic was particularly popular because it was tasteless and its symptoms mimicked common illnesses. You finish your porridge and immediately feel dizzy. This could be from a mercury, the lead, the stress, or simple hunger. You haven't eaten enough calories to sustain a grown person. The palace diet for servants was deliberately inadequate, designed to keep the staff weak and compliant rather than strong and potentially rebellious. As you stand to leave the dining hall, you catch a glimpse of the imperial breakfast being carried past on golden trays. The emperor's meal includes bird's nest soup, shark fin delicacies, and exotic fruits transported from across the empire. It's a feast fit for a god, and it's probably just as deadly as your humble porridge, just with better presentation. The morning meal is over, but your day of survival has barely begun. Next comes the challenge of getting dressed properly. And in Imperial China, wearing the wrong outfit wasn't just a fashion faux pas, it was a capital crime. You return to your quarters with your stomach churning from breakfast, but now you face an even deadlier challenge: getting dressed without committing fashion-related treason. In Imperial China, clothing wasn't just about comfort or style, it was a complex legal code worn on your body, where the wrong thread could literally cost you your head. The garment hanging in your small chamber looks innocent enough, a simple robe in muted brown silk. But as you examine it more closely, you realize that even this humble servant's outfit is a minefield of potential violations. The silk itself tells a story of rank and regulation that would make modern dress codes seem laughably simple. Silk production was so tightly controlled by the imperial government that wearing silk above your station was considered an act of rebellion. The quality of your silk, how smooth, how lustrous, how finely woven, had to perfectly match your position in the palace hierarchy. Too fine, and you're accused of arrogance. Too coarse, and you're showing disrespect to the institution you serve. You slip the robe over your head, but immediately notice something that makes your blood freeze: the collar. In Qing Dynasty China, collar styles were regulated by law. The high, stiff collar of the Manchu people was mandatory for all palace servants, regardless of their ethnic background. This wasn't just fashion, it was cultural assimilation through clothing. Han Chinese servants who tried to wear traditional Han-style clothing faced severe punishment for ethnic noncompliance. The color of your robe presents its own set of deadly complications. Brown was designated for low-level servants, but the shade of brown mattered enormously. Too light, and it might be mistaken for the tan worn by mid-level administrators. Too dark, and it could be confused with the deep browns reserved for palace guards. Getting the color wrong wasn't just embarrassing, it was a form of identity fraud punishable by public flogging. But the real danger lies in the details. You notice that your robe has small decorative elements woven into the fabric, tiny geometric patterns that seem harmless but carry enormous significance. These patterns were part of a complex symbolic language that communicated everything from your department assignment to your level of trustworthiness. The number of decorative elements on your clothing was strictly regulated. Too many ornaments suggested you're trying to elevate your status through fashion. Too few suggested you didn't respect the importance of your position. The palace had officials whose sole job was to inspect servants' clothing for violations, and they took their work very seriously. As you adjust the robe, you discover another potential death trap: the sleeves. Sleeve length in Imperial China was a precise indicator of social status and function. Your sleeves must be exactly the right length, long enough to show respect through concealment of your hands, but short enough to demonstrate your readiness to work. Servants caught with sleeves that were even slightly the wrong length faced accusations of laziness or pretension. The shoes present their own unique dangers. The simple cloth slippers provided for servants had to be worn in a specific way, with the heels slightly exposed to show humility. But the material of the shoes mattered too. Leather was forbidden for low-ranking servants, as it was reserved for military personnel and high officials. Even the color of your shoe threads was regulated. Historians still argue whether the extreme complexity of dress codes was designed to prevent social mobility or simply to create so many potential violations that anyone could be punished at any time for any reason. The result was the same: a population of servants who lived in constant fear of inadvertent rule breaking. You catch a reflection in a small bronze mirror and notice something that stops your heart: a small thread hanging from your sleeve. This isn't just untidiness. It's a sign of poor maintenance that could be interpreted as disrespect for imperial property. Palace servants were expected to maintain their clothing in perfect condition at all times, and a loose thread could result in a formal reprimand or worse. The morning inspection bell rings, and you realize you have minutes to present yourself for the daily clothing review. Every servant must stand in formation while palace officials examine their attire for violations. This isn't a cursory glance. It's a detailed inspection that covers everything from the straightness of your collar to the cleanliness of your fingernails. As you hurry toward the inspection courtyard, you pass by a group of eunuch officials wearing their distinctive robes. Their clothing is a masterclass in imperial fashion. Silk so fine it seems to glow, colors so precisely calibrated they seem to have been measured with scientific instruments, and decorative elements so perfectly arranged they look like works of art. But even these high-ranking officials aren't immune to clothing-related dangers. You notice one eunuch nervously adjusting his hat, a small cap that must sit at exactly the right angle to demonstrate proper respect for the emperor. Too far forward suggests arrogance. Too far back suggests casualness. And any visible adjustment suggests anxiety, which could be interpreted as guilt. The inspection line forms, and you take your place among the other servants. Your heart pounds as you wait for your turn, knowing that your survival depends not just on following the rules, but on perfectly executing dozens of microscopic regulations that could change without notice. Your clothing examination is about to begin, but first, you must navigate the treacherous streets of Imperial China, where simply walking from point A to point B could kill you in ways you never imagined. You step outside the palace walls for your first official errand, and immediately realize that surviving the Forbidden City was just the tutorial level. The streets of Imperial China are a chaotic symphony of sewage, smoke, and screaming that would make modern city planners weep into their safety regulations. The first assault on your senses is the smell. Imagine the worst public restroom you've ever encountered, multiply it by 1,000, and add the distinct aroma of rotting fish, unwashed bodies, and burning coal. The streets of Beijing serve as an open sewer system, where human waste flows freely in channels carved along the roadside. There's no concept of municipal sanitation. Waste disposal is a personal problem, and most people solve it by throwing everything into the street. You step carefully around the sewage channels, but there's no safe path. The streets are unpaved dirt that turns to treacherous mud when it rains and hazardous dust clouds when it's dry. Your cloth shoes, remember, leather is forbidden for servants, immediately soak through with a mixture of water, waste, and unidentifiable fluids that you really don't want to think about. The street vendors add their own layer of danger to your journey. Food stalls line the roadway, offering everything from steamed buns to roasted insects, but food safety regulations don't exist. The meat hanging in the stalls has been there for days, attracting clouds of flies that also serve as the primary seasoning. The water used for cooking comes from the same sources used for washing clothes, bathing, and waste disposal. You're trying to navigate around a particularly aggressive dumpling vendor when you hear the sound that makes every person in Imperial China freeze with terror: the rhythmic beating of drums. This isn't musical entertainment. It's the warning signal for an imperial procession. When the emperor or a high-ranking official travels through the streets, everyone must follow specific protocols or face immediate execution. The street erupts into controlled chaos as people scramble to position themselves correctly for the imperial passage. You must kneel facing the road with your eyes cast downward, your hands placed in the proper position, and your breathing controlled to avoid any sound that might disturb the imperial party. Getting the kneeling position wrong, too upright suggests disrespect, too low suggests mockery, can result in public beating. But here's the deadly catch. You don't know which imperial procession this is, so you don't know which specific protocol to follow. Different members of the imperial family require different forms of acknowledgement, and using the wrong one is considered a grave insult. The Empress requires a different kneeling style than the Emperor's mother, who requires a different style than the Emperor's brothers. As the procession approaches, you glimpse the elaborate palanquin carried by dozens of bearers. The sight is genuinely spectacular. Silk banners fluttering in a breeze, armed guards in gleaming armor, officials in robes that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. But looking too long at this display is forbidden, and you quickly lower your gaze back to the muddy street. The procession passes, but the danger isn't over. Standing up too quickly after an imperial passage suggests impatience with the honor of serving the emperor. Standing up too slowly suggests laziness or physical infirmity. You must rise at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way, while maintaining the proper expression of humble gratitude. Once the procession disappears around a corner, the street returns to its normal chaos. Vendors resume their shouting, pedestrians continue their jostling, and you continue your journey through what feels like an obstacle course designed by someone who actively wants you to fail. The crowd itself presents unique dangers. Pickpockets work the busy streets, but getting robbed isn't just a financial inconvenience. It's a legal nightmare. If you report the theft to authorities, you'll be questioned about why you were carrying anything worth stealing, suggesting you might be corrupt. If you don't report it and the authorities discover your loss, you'll be accused of lying about your financial status. Street beggars approach you constantly, and each interaction is a potential trap. Giving money to beggars was officially discouraged because it enabled laziness, but refusing to help could be seen as lacking compassion. Some beggars were actually undercover officials testing the moral character of palace servants. Others were genuine, desperate people who might become violent if refused. You pass by a group of street performers juggling knives and breathing fire. Entertainment that would be impressive if it weren't happening mere feet from your path through sewage-filled streets. Street performance was technically illegal without proper permits, but officials often ignored it because it kept the population distracted from more serious forms of dissent. The architecture itself wants to kill you. Buildings lean precariously into the street, their upper stories supported by wooden beams that creak ominously with every gust of wind. There are no building codes, no structural inspections, and no liability insurance. Collapse is a constant threat, and pedestrians are expected to navigate around falling debris as a normal part of city life. As you finally reach your destination, a merchant shop where you're supposed to collect supplies for the palace, you realize that you've survived the journey through Imperial China streets. But now you face an even greater challenge, dealing with the bureaucratic nightmare that governs every aspect of daily life in the empire. You approach the merchant shop with your official palace requisition scroll, confident that this simple transaction will be straightforward. How wrong you are. In Imperial China, even buying a bag of rice requires navigating a bureaucratic labyrinth that would make modern government offices seem like models of efficiency. The merchant examines your scroll with the intensity of a detective investigating a murder. This isn't paranoia, it's survival. Accepting a forged or improperly filled document could result in his execution for treason, while refusing a legitimate palace order could also result in execution for insulting the emperor. He pulls out a magnifying glass to examine the official seals, checking them against a reference book that's thicker than a modern phone directory. Your scroll requires 7 different official seals to be valid, each applied by a different department within the palace bureaucracy. The Department of Internal Affairs must verify that you're authorized to make purchases. The Department of Palace Supplies must confirm that the requested items are appropriate for your rank. The Department of Financial Control must approve the expenditure. The Department of Quality Assurance must pre-approve the specific merchant. The Department of Transportation must authorize the movement of goods. The Department of Security must confirm that you're not smuggling contraband. And finally, the Department of Documentation must certify that all the other departments have properly completed their paperwork. Getting these 7 seals requires visiting 7 different offices, each with its own operating hours, protocols, and bribery expectations. The Department of Internal Affairs only operates on days with odd numbers. The Department of Palace Supplies requires appointments made 3 days in advance. The Department of Financial Control demands a personal interview with your supervisor's supervisor. Each department has its own interpretation of what constitutes proper documentation, and what one department approves, another might reject for completely different reasons. The merchant is still examining your scroll when you notice a line forming behind you. These aren't patient customers. They're other palace servants, all carrying their own official scrolls, all facing the same bureaucratic nightmare. The tension in the air is palpable because everyone knows that failing to complete their assigned tasks on time could result in severe punishment. But here's where the system gets truly diabolical. The merchant's examination reveals that one of your 7 seals is slightly smudged. Not missing, not forged, just smudged. This could invalidate the entire document, forcing you to return to all 7 departments to get new seals. The process would take days, during which time you'd be reported as failing to complete your assigned duties. The merchant offers a solution. He knows someone who can fix the smudged seal for a small fee. This person happens to be his cousin, who works in the Department of Documentation and can provide a replacement seal for just a few coins. This sounds like a reasonable solution until you realize that paying for official seal replacement is technically bribery, which is punishable by death. But refusing to pay the bribe is also dangerous. The merchant could report that you presented invalid documentation, suggesting either incompetence or attempted fraud. Palace servants who were reported for documentation problems faced intensive investigation that could uncover all sorts of other minor violations, leading to a cascade of punishments. You decide to pay the bribe because survival trumps legal purity in Imperial China. The merchant's cousin appears with suspicious speed, almost as if this entire scenario was a planned shakedown. He examines your scroll with the same theatrical intensity, declares that the seal can indeed be repaired, and produces a replacement that looks suspiciously like it was prepared in advance. The transaction finally proceeds, but now you face the challenge of actually getting the supplies you came for. The merchant's shop contains the items on your list, but they're not the quality specified in your scroll. The rice is lower grade, the silk is cheaper fabric, and the tea leaves look like they might have been used before. Accepting inferior goods could get you punished for poor judgment, but demanding better quality could be seen as exceeding your authority. Historians still argue whether this endemic corruption was a feature or a bug of the imperial system. Some argue that bribery served as informal tax that funded the bureaucracy beyond official salaries. Others maintain that corruption was simply the inevitable result of a system too complex for honest administration. The quality issue gets resolved through another layer of bureaucracy. The merchant provides a quality adjustment certificate that officially acknowledges the substitution while absolving you of responsibility for accepting inferior goods. This certificate requires its own seal from the Department of Quality Assurance, which conveniently has a representative in the shop who can provide the seal for another small fee. By the time you complete this simple purchase, you've paid bribes to 4 different people, signed documents you don't understand, and agreed to quality standards that don't match your original requirements. The entire process has taken 3 hours and cost more than your monthly salary, but you've successfully navigated the bureaucratic maze without getting executed. As you prepare to leave the shop with your supplies, you're already dreading the return journey through the palace bureaucracy, where you'll need to document every aspect of this transaction for at least 3 different departments. Each department will want to know why the process took so long, why you paid extra fees, and why the quality doesn't match the original request. But first, you need to survive the trip back through the streets of Imperial China, where your bundle of supplies makes you a target for thieves, beggars, and officials looking for unauthorized commerce. The day is far from over, and you're already exhausted from the simple act of buying basic supplies. This is bureaucracy as warfare, and you're just trying to survive until tomorrow. After navigating the dangerous waters of religious conformity, you face what might be Imperial China's most sophisticated torture device, the Imperial Examination System. This bureaucratic maze promises social mobility and government careers to anyone capable of memorizing the entire corpus of Chinese classical literature while maintaining perfect moral character and demonstrating administrative competence through tests that would make modern standardized testing look like elementary school quizzes. The examination process begins in childhood with educational preparation that transforms learning from exploration into endurance sport. You memorize the 4 books and 5 classics, not for understanding, but for perfect recitation, absorbing thousands of pages of Confucian philosophy, historical analysis, and poetic commentary until your brain becomes a walking library of ancient Chinese wisdom. Modern students complain about cramming for finals, but you're cramming for life itself, because failure means permanent exclusion from respectable society. Local examinations serve as preliminary filters, eliminating candidates who lack either intellectual capacity or psychological resilience necessary for advanced bureaucratic torture. You sit in a small wooden cell barely large enough for one person, writing essays on topics like the moral implications of administrative efficiency, while proctors patrol the examination hall looking for signs of cheating, nervous breakdowns, or creative interpretations of classical texts that might indicate dangerous independent thinking. The competition creates social dynamics that make modern academic pressure look gentle by comparison. Thousands of candidates compete for a handful of passing scores, creating environments where collaboration becomes impossible and friendship transforms into strategic alliance at best and calculated betrayal at worst. You study alongside people who will celebrate your failure as enthusiastically as their own success. Because advancement in Imperial China operates as zero-sum competition where someone else's achievement directly threatens your own prospects. Success in local examinations qualifies you for provincial tests, which escalate the psychological warfare to levels that would impress modern military strategists. The examination compound becomes a temporary city populated by desperate scholars who've spent decades preparing for 3 days that will determine their entire future. You're locked in cells for the duration, subsisting on food you bring yourself while composing essays under conditions that combine solitary confinement with academic performance pressure. Cheating scandals reveal the creative lengths people pursue when faced with impossible standards and life-altering consequences. Candidates smuggle reference materials in clothing, tattoo classical quotations on their bodies, and develop elaborate schemes for receiving outside assistance during examinations. Proctors respond with increasingly sophisticated detection methods, creating an arms race between academic fraud and examination security that would fascinate modern criminologists studying white-collar crime evolution. The psychological toll of repeated examination failure creates a subculture of perpetual students who spend entire adult lives pursuing credentials they never achieve. You encounter middle-aged men who've taken examinations 20 or 30 times, supporting families through teaching while continuing to study for tests they're statistically unlikely to pass. It's educational purgatory, where hope and desperation combine to create personalities that exist in permanent states of almost but not quite achievement. Historians still argue whether the imperial examination system promoted meritocracy or simply created more sophisticated forms of social exclusion, but experiencing it firsthand eliminates academic curiosity about administrative theory. The system theoretically allows anyone to achieve high office through intellectual merit, while practically requiring family wealth, social connections, and psychological resilience that exclude most potential candidates before they begin serious preparation. Mental health consequences of examination pressure create medical conditions that don't exist in societies with different approaches to career advancement. Examination syndrome manifests as depression, anxiety, and occasional complete psychological breaks that leave scholars incapable of normal social functioning. Traditional Chinese medicine addresses these conditions with herbal treatments that roughly translate to drink tea and try not to think about it, which works about as well as you'd expect. The economic impact of examination preparation creates family financial strategies that resemble modern educational investment planning, except with higher stakes and fewer backup options. Families mortgage property, borrow money, and sacrifice other children's opportunities to support one promising son through decades of examination attempts. It's venture capital applied to human development, with return on investment measured in government salaries and social prestige rather than monetary profit. Regional quotas ensure geographic representation in imperial administration, while creating artificial scarcity that makes examination competition even more brutal than pure meritocracy would require. Candidates from educationally advanced regions face steeper competition than those from remote provinces, but everyone faces odds that would discourage most rational people from attempting the process. It's affirmative action combined with intellectual gladiatorial combat, designed to serve imperial administrative needs rather than individual career aspirations. The final metropolitan examinations in the capital represent the ultimate test of human endurance disguised as academic evaluation. Survivors of local and provincial competitions face questions that require not just knowledge, but wisdom, creativity, and political insight sophisticated enough to impress emperors while remaining sufficiently orthodox to avoid accusations of dangerous thinking. You're writing for an audience of one, whose approval determines whether your decades of preparation result in prestigious careers or spectacular public failure that destroys your family's social standing for generations. Your examination ordeal mercifully ends, but before you can recover from academic trauma, your family announces they've found you a spouse, someone you've never met, never spoken to, and quite possibly wouldn't recognize if you passed them on the street. Welcome to Imperial Chinese marriage, where romantic love is considered a dangerous Western concept that interferes with proper family planning, economic strategy, and social advancement through carefully calculated human breeding programs that make modern arranged marriages look spontaneous. The selection process unfolds like a business merger negotiated by people who've never met the primary stakeholders. Your parents consult with matchmakers who maintain detailed files on eligible candidates, including family wealth, social status, health records, and personality assessments based on brief interviews and neighborhood gossip. It's like online dating managed by professional investigators, except you don't get to see the profiles and have no input on compatibility factors that might matter to you personally. Professional matchmakers operate as human resources specialists for the marriage industry, maintaining networks of contacts that would impress modern headhunters. They evaluate potential matches based on astrological compatibility, family reputation, financial prospects, and physical attributes described in terms that make modern personal ads sound romantic. Your future spouse is reduced to a list of qualifications that reads like a job description: healthy teeth, fertile appearance, submissive temperament, skilled in household management, no history of mental instability. The negotiation process reveals marriage as fundamentally economic transaction disguised as social ceremony. Families exchange detailed financial information with the transparency of modern corporate mergers, discussing dowry amounts, property transfers, and inheritance arrangements while the actual couple remains carefully segregated to prevent emotional complications that might interfere with rational decision-making. Love is considered a luxury that wealthy families can afford, but practical families should avoid. Wedding preparations consume months of planning that make modern wedding industry look simple by comparison. Every detail carries symbolic meaning that requires expert interpretation, from the color of silk used in ceremonial robes to the number of dishes served at the reception feast. You're essentially performing in a theatrical production where everyone knows their roles except you, and improvisation is strongly discouraged because it might offend ancestors or violate traditions that ensure marital success. The actual wedding ceremony transforms you from individual person into component of larger family mechanism. with vows that emphasize duty, obedience, and reproductive obligations rather than emotional partnership or personal fulfillment. You promise to honor not just your spouse, but their entire extended family, including deceased relatives who will apparently monitor your marital performance from whatever afterlife monitoring station manages ancestral quality control. Consummation of marriage occurs under family supervision that makes modern helicopter parenting look hands-off by comparison. Elder relatives provide detailed instructions on proper technique, timing, and positions approved by traditional medical texts that treat human sexuality with the romance of veterinary manuals. Privacy becomes irrelevant when your reproductive success is considered family business requiring active management and frequent progress reports. Concubinage presents itself as legitimate career path for women and practical solution for men, creating household arrangements that would challenge modern relationship counselors. Wealthy men maintain multiple wives ranked in elaborate hierarchies that make corporate org charts look simple, while women compete for status within domestic arrangements that combine marriage with workplace politics. It's polygamy managed through bureaucratic systems that would impress government administrators. Historians still argue whether Chinese marriage customs provided more security or less freedom than Western alternatives. But when you're living inside the system, comparative analysis feels less relevant than daily survival strategies. The Chinese approach prioritizes family stability over individual happiness, operating on theories that make modern relationship advice look indulgent and potentially dangerous to social order. Child-rearing responsibilities begin before conception with elaborate rituals designed to influence the gender, intelligence, and character of future offspring. Pregnant women follow dietary restrictions that make modern pregnancy guidelines look flexible, avoiding foods, activities, and thoughts that might negatively impact fetal development. It's prenatal programming that extends maternal responsibility to include psychological management of unborn children through dietary control and emotional regulation. Male children represent family investment opportunities that require decades of careful cultivation, while female children present family financial obligations that drain resources without providing long-term returns. Sons carry family names and support aging parents, while daughters transfer to other families through marriage arrangements that resemble expensive gifts to in-laws. The economic reality of gender creates household dynamics that make modern discussions of gender equality seem impossibly optimistic. Domestic violence receives official sanction through legal codes that treat wives as property subject to reasonable correction by husbands exercising legitimate authority over household management. Physical punishment for disobedience, laziness, or disrespect is not just permitted, but encouraged as necessary for maintaining proper family order. It's relationship management through systematic intimidation, legally protected and socially endorsed. Educational opportunities for women exist primarily to make them more effective household managers and more appealing marriage candidates, rather than developing intellectual capacity for its own sake. Female literacy focuses on domestic skills, moral instruction, and classical poetry that reinforces traditional gender roles rather than expanding career options or promoting independent thinking. It's education designed to create better wives rather than autonomous individuals. The extended family system creates living arrangements where privacy is literally impossible and personal space becomes a foreign concept that would confuse architectural planners. Multiple generations share compounds where every conversation is overheard. Every decision is subject to group consultation, and every personal choice affects family reputation. Individual autonomy dissolves into collective identity that makes modern family dynamics look wonderfully independent. Divorce exists in theory, but requires proving grounds that make modern no-fault divorce look scandalously permissive. Women can request divorce for physical abuse that threatens their lives, but must provide witness testimony from family members who have financial incentives to maintain marriages regardless of personal cost. Men can divorce wives for failing to produce male heirs, showing disrespect to in-laws, or exhibiting behavior that embarrasses family social standing. It's dissolution of marriage through adversarial legal processes that make modern divorce court look friendly. Your marital adjustments are interrupted by news that transforms personal problems into survival emergencies. The Yellow River has changed course again, flooding millions of acres and displacing entire populations in what Chinese officials diplomatically call natural disaster, but privately understand as divine punishment for moral failures that require immediate scapegoating and creative blame assignment to protect imperial legitimacy from popular anger. Natural disasters in Imperial China operate like massive social experiments designed to test governmental competence, popular patience, and imperial authority under conditions that make modern emergency management look sophisticated by comparison. Floods, famines, earthquakes, and droughts arrive with seasonal regularity that would allow effective preparation if preparation were considered an appropriate response rather than an admission that heaven might be imperfect or imperial policy might require adjustment. The Yellow River, known as China's Sorrow, with a kind of nickname that suggests intimate familiarity with devastating behavior, changes course every few decades with the predictability of geological processes and the social impact of civilizational collapse. Millions of people wake up to discover their homes are now underwater. Their farms have become lake beds, and their life savings are buried under silt deposits that will take decades to clear, assuming anyone survives long enough to attempt the clearing. Government response to natural disasters reveals administrative priorities that make modern bureaucratic inefficiency look like models of responsive governance. Imperial officials focus primarily on maintaining tax collection schedules rather than providing disaster relief, operating on theories that natural catastrophes shouldn't interfere with fiscal obligations and that suffering builds character in ways that government assistance would undermine. It's disaster management through benign neglect combined with aggressive revenue protection. Famine relief efforts demonstrate Chinese logistics capabilities applied to humanitarian crises with results that would make modern aid organizations weep. Government granaries, theoretically maintained for emergency food distribution, turn out to contain mostly records of grain that was sold years earlier by corrupt officials who assumed disasters would never actually require the supplies they were stealing. It's contingency planning that works perfectly until contingencies actually occur. The mandate of heaven doctrine transforms natural disasters from random, unfortunate events into cosmic political commentary that makes modern electoral accountability look straightforward by comparison. Floods, earthquakes, and famines are interpreted as signs that imperial rule has lost divine approval, creating theological crises that require either massive governmental reform or elaborate explanations of why heaven is temporarily mistaken about imperial worthiness. Earthquake prediction relies on observational methods that make modern seismology look supernatural by comparison. Chinese scientists monitor animal behavior, astronomical phenomena, and atmospheric conditions with the dedication of people who understand that failed predictions result in execution rather than peer review criticism. It's geological forecasting where the stakes include professional reputation and continued breathing, which tends to encourage conservative estimation techniques. Popular responses to natural disasters reveal social dynamics that make modern emergency cooperation look selfish by comparison, while simultaneously demonstrating human behavior under stress that makes modern disaster sociology look optimistic. Communities share resources, shelter displaced families, and organize mutual aid networks with generosity that would inspire modern humanitarian workers, while also engaging in price gouging, hoarding, and violence that would shock modern economists studying disaster economics. Historians still argue whether Chinese disaster management was more effective than European alternatives, but when you're fleeing floodwaters while carrying everything you own and looking for food that doesn't exist, comparative administrative studies feel less urgent than immediate survival challenges. The Chinese approach emphasizes social order maintenance over individual rescue, which works well for maintaining social order and poorly for individual rescue. Relief distribution systems operate through networks of local officials who treat disaster aid as entrepreneurial opportunities rather than humanitarian obligations. Food, clothing, and shelter supplies arrive in affected areas accompanied by price lists that make disaster capitalism look like charitable donation. Survival becomes market transaction where ability to pay determines access to necessities required for continued existence. Migration patterns following major disasters create population movements that make modern refugee crises look manageable by comparison. Millions of displaced people wander across provinces looking for employment, shelter, and food, while competing with local populations who view refugees as threats to already limited resources. It's humanitarian crisis management through geographical redistribution of suffering rather than actual problem solving. Disease outbreaks follow natural disasters with the reliability of epidemiological processes that medieval medicine approaches with treatments that make modern public health look miraculous by comparison. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery spread through displaced populations living in conditions that violate every sanitation principle ever discovered. While traditional medical responses focus on balancing bodily humors rather than addressing contaminated water supplies or overcrowded shelters. Agricultural recovery from natural disasters requires years of rebuilding that make modern economic stimulus packages look immediate by comparison. Farmers must clear flood debris, replace lost livestock, replant destroyed crops, and rebuild irrigation systems while supporting families on resources that were inadequate before the disaster struck. It's economic reconstruction that makes modern recession recovery look rapid and straightforward. Religious interpretations of natural disasters create theological debates that make modern discussions of divine intervention look academically detached by comparison. Buddhist concepts of karma conflict with Taoist ideas about natural harmony, while Confucian emphasis on moral governance struggles to explain why virtuous people suffer alongside corrupt officials. It's disaster theology that provides emotional comfort while offering limited practical guidance for actual survival. Social changes following major disasters reveal community resilience that makes modern social capital theories look pessimistic while simultaneously demonstrating social breakdown that makes modern sociological studies of crisis response look optimistic. Traditional authority structures dissolve under survival pressure, creating opportunities for social mobility and innovation, while also enabling exploitation and violence that would shock peacetime moral standards. Climate patterns in Imperial China operate on cycles that make modern weather prediction look precise by comparison, with periods of stability interrupted by decades of extreme conditions that test civilizational endurance in ways that make modern climate change adaptation planning look proactive and well-funded. You're living through geological processes that operate on timescales that make human planning seem presumptuous and probably irrelevant. While you're still coping with flood recovery, Imperial conscription officers arrive in your village with the enthusiasm of people recruiting volunteers for a suicide mission disguised as patriotic service. Military conscription in Imperial China operates on the principle that every able-bodied man owes the emperor his life in whatever capacity imperial defense requires, which currently means facing Mongol raiders who approach warfare with the professional competence of people who've spent generations perfecting the art of killing Chinese soldiers. Your military training begins with equipment distribution that makes modern military supply shortages look like minor administrative oversights. You receive a bamboo spear that's been recycled through several previous conscription cycles, armor made from leather that once protected someone who's obviously no longer using it, and instructions delivered by sergeants who learn military tactics through the same apprenticeship system that produces blacksmiths and noodle makers. It's professional military preparation that treats warfare as craft skill rather than life or death competency requirement. The weapons you're trained to use reveal Chinese military technology that makes medieval European warfare look sophisticated by comparison. Your primary weapon is a spear with a bamboo shaft that splinters under stress and a metal point that's been sharpened so many times it now resembles a large needle. Secondary weapons include a sword that's more decorative than functional, and a crossbow that fires bolts with the accuracy of arrows shot by blind archers during earthquakes. Military strategy sessions unfold like philosophy seminars conducted by people who've read extensively about warfare but never experienced combat conditions that make theoretical knowledge seem quaint and potentially fatal. Your commanders quote classical military texts with the confidence of professors teaching subjects they've never practiced, explaining tactical principles that work beautifully on paper and catastrophically on battlefields where enemies refuse to follow prescribed behavioral patterns. The enemy you're preparing to face approaches warfare with professional dedication that makes Chinese military preparation look like community theater rehearsals for amateur productions of war plays. Mongol raiders spend their entire lives on horseback, practicing archery from childhood, and treating combat as natural extension of hunting skills developed through survival necessity rather than military academy curriculum designed to produce officers capable of passing examinations rather than winning battles. Training exercises reveal the gap between Chinese military theory and practical combat application in ways that make modern military exercises look realistic by comparison. You practice formations that require coordination and communication systems that don't exist, using equipment that breaks under training conditions and will presumably perform worse under actual combat stress. It's military preparation that optimizes for parade ground appearance rather than battlefield effectiveness. Historians still argue whether Chinese military capabilities were inferior to Mongol alternatives, but when you're holding a bamboo spear while facing mounted archers who can accurately shoot arrows while riding at full gallop, comparative military analysis feels less relevant than immediate survival planning. The Chinese approach emphasizes discipline and organization over individual combat skills, which works well for maintaining military order and poorly for staying alive during actual battles. Supply line management demonstrates Chinese logistics applied to military operations with results that make modern military supply chains look miraculous by comparison. Food arrives sporadically. Medicine exists primarily in theoretical form, and replacement equipment depends on looting battlefield casualties who no longer require their weapons. It's military sustainability planning that assumes wars will be short and victorious rather than prolonged and expensive. Combat tactics rely heavily on numerical superiority and defensive positioning, operating on theories that make modern military doctrine look aggressively innovative by comparison. Chinese strategy emphasizes building walls, waiting behind fortifications, and hoping enemies will lose interest and attack someone else instead. It's military planning that treats warfare as customer service, problem requiring patience, and defensive positioning rather than active problem solving through superior violence application. The social dynamics of military service create army communities that make modern military culture look individualistic by comparison. Soldiers are organized into units based on regional origin, family connections, and social class rather than military specialization or combat effectiveness. It's military organization that prioritizes social harmony over tactical efficiency, which works well for maintaining morale and poorly for achieving military objectives. Medical care for wounded soldiers reveals Chinese military medicine that makes civilian medical practice look sophisticated by comparison. Battle injuries are treated with herbal remedies designed for peacetime ailments. Surgical techniques that were questionable even for civilian applications, and pain management strategies that rely heavily on alcohol and optimistic thinking. It's combat medicine that approaches warfare injuries as more severe versions of household accidents rather than specialized trauma requiring specific treatment protocols. Military pay systems operate through arrangements that make modern military compensation look generous and reliable by comparison. Soldiers receive wages that arrive irregularly, in amounts that fluctuate based on imperial fiscal conditions, paid in currency that may or may not be accepted by merchants who understand economic realities better than military accountants. It's military compensation that treats soldiers as volunteers who should feel honored to serve rather than professionals requiring competitive salaries. Morale maintenance relies on motivational speeches that make modern military inspiration look psychologically sophisticated by comparison. Officers explain that dying for the emperor ensures favorable reincarnation, that military service builds character through suffering, and that victory is guaranteed because Chinese civilization is morally superior to barbarian alternatives. It's military psychology that treats warfare as moral education rather than professional violence requiring specific skills and appropriate compensation. Battlefield communication operates through systems that make modern military coordination look technological by comparison. Messages are delivered by runners who may or may not survive long enough to reach their destinations. Signals are sent through drums that enemies can hear as clearly as friendly forces, and tactical coordination depends on officers shouting instructions that compete with combat noise for auditory attention. It's military communication that treats information sharing as secondary consideration rather than tactical necessity. You wake up one morning with a pounding headache and what feels like daggers stabbing through your stomach. In modern times, you'd pop an aspirin and maybe grab some antacids. But here in Imperial China, you're about to experience medical care that would make medieval Europe look like the Mayo Clinic. The local doctor arrives at your door, carrying a leather satchel filled with what can only be described as nature's most questionable pharmacy. He examines you with the confidence of someone who learned everything from ancient texts that haven't been updated in centuries. Your pulse, he declares after holding your wrist for exactly 3 breaths, indicates an imbalance of hot and cold energies. The solution? Powdered rhinoceros horn mixed with ground tiger bones, because apparently your internal fire needs the spiritual essence of Africa's most dangerous herbivore and Asia's apex predator. You want to explain germ theory, but the closest thing to bacteria in his understanding is evil vapors that can be scared away with loud noises. The prescription gets more creative from there. For your headache, he recommends a paste made from crushed pearls. Not because of any medicinal properties, but because pearls are formed in water, and water cools fire, and your head obviously has too much fire. It's the kind of logic that sounds reasonable if you've never heard of the scientific method. Meanwhile, your stomach pain requires a tea brewed from dried seahorses, because their curved shape supposedly straightens out twisted intestines. You're starting to understand why the average life expectancy hovers around 35. But the real nightmare begins when your condition worsens and surgery becomes necessary. In Imperial China, surgery isn't performed by doctors. It's considered too crude for educated physicians. Instead, you're handed over to the local barber, who approaches your abdomen with the same enthusiasm he brings to trimming beards. His instruments have been cleaned with the same water he uses to wash hair, which is to say they haven't been cleaned at all since the Tang Dynasty. Anesthesia consists of a strong rice wine, and maybe some opium if you're lucky, though the barber warns that too much will interfere with your natural healing energies. You watch in horror as he selects a knife that's clearly seen better centuries and begins explaining his technique. He learned surgery the same way he learned barbering, by watching his father, who learned from his father, in an unbroken chain of questionable medical practices stretching back to when people thought the heart was just a blood-warming device. The operating theater is your kitchen table, sterilized with the same attention to cleanliness that characterizes everything else in your medieval life. The barber's assistant holds you down while neighborhood children gather to watch, because apparently your emergency surgery doubles as free entertainment. Historians still argue whether Chinese surgical techniques were more advanced than their European counterparts. But when you're the one on the table, the debate feels academic. Recovery involves bed rest in a room where the windows are sealed shut to prevent evil spirits from entering through the fresh air. Your family burns incense constantly, filling the space with smoke that would make a modern fire marshal weep. The prescribed diet consists entirely of white foods, rice, tofu, and steamed buns, because colored foods might overstimulate your damaged organs. It's like being on the world's most boring cleanse, except the stakes are your actual life. The follow-up care reveals more creative medical thinking. Your wound is dressed with spider webs, which actually aren't a terrible idea since they contain natural antibiotics, though nobody understands why they work. The bandages are changed once a week whether they need it or not, because daily changes would disturb the natural healing process. You begin to suspect that medical school in Imperial China involve a lot more philosophy and a lot less anatomy than you'd prefer. Pain management relies heavily on acupuncture, which sounds reasonable until you see the needles. They're thick as modern knitting needles and about as sharp as pencils, inserted with the precision of someone who learned anatomy from drawings that labeled the liver as the anger organ. The theory makes sense. Blocked energy channels cause pain, so poking holes should release the blockage, but the execution feels like being attacked by a very slow, very methodical porcupine. Traditional remedies flood your recovery room like a medieval pharmacy explosion. Dried bat droppings for fever, ground turtle shells for longevity, and something called dragon bones. They're actually fossilized dinosaur remains. Your family spent a fortune on these ingredients, not because they work, but because expensive medicine must be better medicine. It's the same logic that drives people to buy premium bottled water, except the consequences are slightly more life-threatening. The strangest part is how confident everyone seems about treatments that clearly aren't working. Your doctor quotes ancient texts with the authority of someone citing peer-reviewed journals, even though those texts were written when people thought the brain was just skull insulation. Medical knowledge passes down through generations unchanged, because improving on ancient wisdom would be presumptuous. Innovation in medicine is about as welcome as innovation in ancestor worship. Your recovery is interrupted by commotion outside, and you realize you're about to witness Imperial China's justice system in action. A crowd has gathered around a man kneeling in the dirt, his hands bound behind his back, while an official reads charges that would make modern lawyers question their career choices. The accused crime? Stealing 3 copper coins from a merchant stall, roughly equivalent to swiping someone's loose change today, but treated with the severity of armed robbery. The punishment unfolds with theatrical precision that makes courtroom drama look understated. 20 strikes with bamboo canes, administered by professional beaters who've turned judicial torture into an art form. You watch the thick bamboo rods whistle through the air with sickening efficiency, each impact producing sounds that will haunt your dreams for weeks. The victim's screams echo off surrounding buildings while spectators place casual bets on whether he'll survive the full count. Welcome to justice, Imperial China style, where proportional punishment is apparently a foreign concept. The creativity of Chinese punishments extends far beyond simple beatings, revealing a judicial system that approached torture with the innovation of engineers and the enthusiasm of artists. Minor infractions like public drunkenness earn you a session in the wooden stocks, but with a Chinese twist. Your head is locked in position while passersby are encouraged to throw rotten vegetables and creative insults. Its community service meets public humiliation, with added nutritional value for local plants that benefit from the organic fertilizer. More serious crimes unlock punishment options that would make medieval European executioners take notes. Counterfeiting imperial currency, for example, results in having your hands slowly crushed between specially designed stone plates, because apparently the irony of destroying the tools used to create fake money appeals to Chinese judicial humor. The process takes hours, during which the condemned person remains conscious and conversational, creating an awkward social situation where small talk feels inappropriate, but silence seems rude. Historians still argue whether Chinese punishments were crueler than their European counterparts, but experiencing them firsthand eliminates any academic curiosity about comparative torture studies. The Chinese approach emphasizes prolonged suffering over quick execution, operating on the theory that lengthy punishment provides more time for moral reflection. It's rehabilitation through agony, which sounds progressive until you're the one doing the reflecting while your bones are being systematically broken. Theft of government property launches you into punishment territory that makes horror movies look like children's television. The Ling Chi, or death by 1,000 cuts, involve precisely what it sounds like. Skilled executioners slice away pieces of the condemned person over several hours, keeping them alive and conscious throughout the process. The technique requires years of training to master, because accidentally hitting vital organs too early ruins the entire performance. It's artisanal execution, crafted with the same attention to detail that others bring to fine cooking or beautiful calligraphy. The execution ground becomes a twisted marketplace where vendors sell snacks to spectators and families bid for body parts believed to possess medicinal properties. Condemned criminals become unwilling pharmacies, their organs harvested for traditional remedies that supposedly cure everything from impotence to evil spirit possession. Your liver might end up in someone's soup, your bones ground into powder for arthritis treatment, and your blood sold to treat anemia. Death row takes on new meaning when you realize you're not just facing execution. You're becoming a full-service medical supply store. Prison conditions, while awaiting trial, make modern detention facilities look like luxury resorts. Cells measure roughly 6 feet by 4 feet, housing up to 8 prisoners who take turns lying down because everyone can't fit horizontally at once. The floor consists of packed dirt that doubles as the bathroom, creating aromatic conditions that would violate every health code ever written. Meals arrive once daily, consisting of rice gruel thin enough to see through and occasionally containing protein in the form of insects that fell into the cooking pot by accident. Interrogation techniques reveal the Chinese legal system's approach to evidence gathering, which relies heavily on confession extraction rather than investigation. Bamboo splinters under fingernails encourage honesty, while creative applications of rope and pulleys help suspects remember details they might have forgotten. The assumption is that innocent people will maintain their innocence regardless of physical discomfort, while guilty parties will confess quickly to end their suffering. It's a foolproof system, assuming you ignore the obvious flaws in its underlying logic. Legal representation doesn't exist in any meaningful sense, because the concept of defending criminals conflicts with maintaining social order. If you're accused, you're probably guilty, and if you're guilty, you deserve punishment. Lawyers would just complicate this elegant system with unnecessary concepts like evidence and reasonable doubt. Instead, magistrates serve as judge, jury, and prosecutor, streamlining the justice process with impressive efficiency. The appeal process consists of begging for mercy from the same person who ordered your punishment, which works about as well as you'd expect. Higher courts exist in theory, but accessing them requires bribes that exceed most people's annual income, and success depends more on political connections than legal merit. Justice becomes a luxury item, available to those wealthy enough to purchase it and unavailable to everyone else who needs it most. While you're still recovering from your encounter with Chinese justice, a different kind of crisis unfolds around you that makes personal legal troubles seem quaint by comparison. Foreign merchants have begun flooding local markets with a product that promises to solve all your pain problems while creating infinitely worse ones you never knew existed. Opium, they call it, and it arrives in Imperial China like a sweet-smelling plague wrapped in promises of medical miracles and social sophistication. The drug enters your world through official channels, marketed initially as medicine by British traders who approach addiction with the enthusiasm of entrepreneurs discovering an unlimited market. Local doctors, already committed to questionable treatments involving rhino horns and tiger bones, embrace opium as a legitimate remedy for everything from headaches to heartbreak. What they don't advertise is the follow-up treatment plan, which involve a lifetime subscription to increasingly expensive doses and a gradual transition from functional human being to hollow-eyed, ghost-haunting opium dens. You watch your neighbors discover this miracle cure with the naive excitement of people who think they found a life hack that's too good to be true, which it absolutely is. The wealthy merchant down your street starts with small doses for his chronic back pain, progressing within months to sessions that consume entire days and most of his family fortune. His business begins failing as he spends more time pursuing chemical peace than managing actual commerce. But he's convinced the solution involves more opium rather than less, because addiction logic operates in fascinating ways. The economic impact spreads through Chinese society like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Except the stone is made of concentrated social destruction, and the water is your entire civilization. Silver flows out of China to pay for British opium faster than the imperial treasury can replace it, creating a balance of trade that would make modern economists weep. Chinese merchants sell silk, tea, and porcelain, products requiring skill, time, and craftsmanship, in exchange for a drug that requires only poppies and chemistry. It's the worst trade deal in human history, negotiated by people too intoxicated to read the fine print. Local governments face impossible choices between enforcing anti-opium laws and maintaining tax revenue from the drug trade. Officials who crack down on opium dealers lose income from bribes and licensing fees, while officials who tolerate the trade watch their jurisdictions dissolve into networks of drug dens and associated criminal enterprises. Corruption becomes a survival mechanism rather than moral failing, because honest officials can't compete financially with colleagues who supplement their salaries through pharmaceutical partnerships. The British approach to Chinese anti-drug efforts reveals diplomatic strategies that make modern international relations look sophisticated by comparison. When Chinese authorities attempt to destroy opium shipments, British warships arrive to protect free trade, which is apparently what they call forcing drugs on unwilling populations. The first opium war breaks out when China tries to enforce its own laws within its own borders, and Britain responds by explaining, through cannon fire, why this violates international commerce principles. Historians still argue whether British opium policies constituted deliberate economic warfare or simply represented aggressive capitalism. But the distinction feels academic when you're watching your society crumble around chemically induced social collapse. The British certainly understand the addictive properties of their product, given their careful efforts to keep opium away from their own population while enthusiastically promoting it elsewhere. It's export-only poison, marketed with the same moral flexibility that characterizes most colonial enterprises. Your daily life becomes increasingly surreal as opium transforms Chinese social structures in ways that make traditional family hierarchy look quaint. Sons sell family heirlooms to buy drugs, while fathers mortgage ancestral properties to support habits that began as medical treatments. Traditional respect for elders evaporates when grandfather spends his days lying in opium-induced stupors, mumbling about dragons that only he can see. Confucian family values meet chemical dependency, and chemistry wins decisively. The opium den culture that emerges creates social spaces that exist outside normal Chinese society, operating by rules that would confuse anthropologists studying human behavior. Wealthy merchants share pipes with common laborers because drug addiction is remarkably egalitarian in its social arrangements. Elaborate etiquette develops around opium consumption, with protocols for sharing pipes, preparing doses, and maintaining consciousness during extended sessions. It's social drinking taken to its logical extreme, where the social activity gradually consumes everything else in participants' lives. Women face particular dangers in opium-saturated communities, as drug-related debt creates markets for human trafficking that make traditional arranged marriages look voluntary by comparison. Families sell daughters to settle opium debts, while women become commodities in economic transactions driven by pharmaceutical desperation. The social safety nets that protect women in traditional Chinese society dissolve when everyone is either intoxicated, desperate for money, or both simultaneously. Economic alternatives to opium addiction prove limited and increasingly irrelevant as the drug trade restructures Chinese commerce around chemical dependency. Traditional industries struggle to compete with the immediate profits available through opium distribution, while skilled craftsmen abandon their trades to pursue careers in pharmaceutical retail. The Chinese economy develops a monocrop mentality focused on opium, making the entire society vulnerable to economic manipulation by foreign suppliers who control both the product and its availability. As opium clouds settle over Chinese society, you discover that chemical addiction represents only one form of dangerous dependency threatening your survival in Imperial China. Religious and philosophical beliefs, seemingly harmless personal choices in modern contexts, become potential death sentences in a society where spiritual conformity is enforced through systematic surveillance and creative punishment techniques that make modern authoritarian states look tolerant by comparison. The official state religion presents itself as a reasonable blend of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, three philosophical traditions that coexist about as peacefully as competing sports teams sharing the same stadium. You're expected to honor your ancestors through Confucian rituals, seek harmony with nature through Taoist practices, and pursue enlightenment through Buddhist meditation, all while avoiding any interpretation that might suggest criticism of imperial authority. It's spiritual multitasking that requires diplomatic skills usually reserved for international treaty negotiations. Christianity arrives in Imperial China carrying the revolutionary message that all humans are equal in God's eyes, which sounds beautiful until you realize you're living in a rigidly hierarchical society where inequality is considered a fundamental organizing principle. Embracing Christian beliefs means rejecting the divine mandate that justifies imperial authority, ancestor worship that maintains family structure, and social stratification that keeps everyone in their assigned places. It's not just changing religions, it's volunteering for systematic social demolition. Secret societies flourish in this atmosphere of religious restriction like mushrooms growing in dark, damp places where sunlight never penetrates. The White Lotus Society promises spiritual enlightenment and social revolution, which attracts desperate people seeking meaning beyond their assigned social roles. Unfortunately, joining these groups involves taking oaths that make modern gang initiations look like casual social commitments, and leaving typically requires dying under circumstances that coroners would classify as mysterious if coroners existed. The Taiping Rebellion demonstrates what happens when alternative religious movements gain political momentum in Imperial China, creating a conflict that makes most modern wars look like minor disagreements. Hong Xiuquan, convinced he's the younger brother of Jesus Christ, launches a rebellion that eventually kills more people than World War I, though with considerably less sophisticated weapons. His Christian-inspired utopian vision includes gender equality, communal property, and the elimination of traditional Chinese social structures. Basically everything guaranteed to make imperial authorities nervous. Government surveillance of religious activities operates through neighborhood reporting systems that would make modern intelligence agencies take notes. Your neighbors are encouraged to monitor your spiritual practices, attendance at religious gatherings, and conversations about divine matters. The local magistrate maintains detailed files on everyone's religious inclinations, updated through a network of informants who earn small payments for reporting suspicious devotional behavior. Privacy becomes a luxury that only the politically powerful can afford. Historians still argue whether Chinese religious persecution was more systematic than European counterparts. But when you're the one being persecuted, comparative studies feel less relevant than immediate survival strategies. The Chinese approach emphasizes conversion over execution, operating on the theory that forced compliance is more useful than martyrdom. You're encouraged to abandon dangerous beliefs through increasingly uncomfortable persuasion techniques that make missionary work look recreational. Practicing forbidden religions requires elaborate deception that transforms daily life into a complex performance art project. Christian converts develop coded language for discussing biblical concepts, hold worship services disguised as social gatherings, and hide religious texts in ways that would impress modern smugglers. Every conversation becomes a potential interrogation, and every friendship carries the risk of betrayal by people who mistake religious devotion for political rebellion. The punishment for religious nonconformity reveals Chinese creativity in combining spiritual reform with physical education. Forced labor in remote provinces gives heretics time to reconsider their theological positions while contributing to imperial infrastructure projects. Road building becomes a religious experience, though not the kind most people seek through spiritual practice. It's rehabilitation through construction work, which sounds progressive until you experience the working conditions. Buddhist monasteries, theoretically protected by official tolerance, face constant scrutiny from authorities who worry about monks developing ideas incompatible with imperial authority. Monastic communities must balance spiritual independence with political compliance, creating institutional arrangements that would challenge modern constitutional lawyers. Abbots serve simultaneously as religious leaders and government informants, reporting on monastery activities to officials who monitor spiritual progress with the same attention they give to tax collection. Folk religions and local spiritual traditions face gradual elimination through systematic cultural homogenization that makes modern globalization look gentle by comparison. Village shamans, traditional healers, and local priests find their practices classified as superstition or rebellion, depending on whether they interfere with imperial administration. Ancient spiritual traditions disappear not through violent suppression, but through bureaucratic attrition, as practitioners are encouraged to pursue more socially acceptable forms of meaning-making. The psychological pressure of religious surveillance creates communities where spiritual conversations become dangerous luxuries and theological questions transform into potential evidence of seditious thinking. You learn to discuss weather, crops, and local gossip while avoiding topics that might reveal religious inclinations incompatible with state orthodoxy. Faith becomes a private matter practiced in silence, which fundamentally changes the nature of religious experience from communal celebration to individual endurance test. Your military service mercifully ends when the war does, though ends might be generous description for what amounts to strategic withdrawal disguised as tactical repositioning. You return home to discover that surviving foreign invasion was apparently the easy part. Now you face economic collapse that makes wartime hardship look like minor financial inconvenience compared to peacetime fiscal catastrophe that's systematically destroying Chinese civilization through taxation, corruption, and economic policies that would make modern recessions look like temporary market adjustments. Tax collection in post-war Imperial China operates with the efficiency of people who understand that extracting maximum revenue from minimum economic base requires creative accounting methods and aggressive collection techniques that make modern tax audits look gentle by comparison. Imperial tax collectors arrive in your village with the enthusiasm of people whose career advancement depends on exceeding collection quotas regardless of local economic conditions, natural disasters, or the basic mathematical reality that you cannot extract wealth from populations that don't possess it. The taxation system reveals governmental financial planning that makes modern fiscal policy look responsible and sustainable by comparison. Taxes are levied on land ownership, agricultural production, commercial transactions, property transfers, marriage ceremonies, death arrangements, and breathing. Though the breathing tax is still in committee pending approval from imperial accountants who are exploring revenue opportunities that don't technically qualify as taxation but achieve similar fiscal results through creative fee structures. Corruption transforms tax collection from governmental service into entrepreneurial opportunity that makes modern political corruption look quaint and limited by comparison. Local officials supplement inadequate salaries by adding personal fees to imperial taxes, creating pricing structures that make tax bills resemble ransom demands rather than civic obligations. It's governmental service that treats public office as business franchise opportunity rather than public trust, requiring ethical behavior and competent administration. Agricultural productivity collapses under tax pressure that makes modern farm subsidies look generous and economically rational by comparison. Farmers abandon fields because crop yields cannot cover tax obligations plus basic survival requirements, creating agricultural decline that reduces tax base while increasing tax rates in downward economic spiral that would fascinate modern economists studying fiscal death spirals if they weren't too depressed by the mathematical inevitability of the outcome. Secret societies emerge from economic desperation like mushrooms growing from social decay, offering revolutionary alternatives to imperial authority that sound appealing until you realize that violent overthrow of established government typically creates conditions worse than whatever problems motivated the revolution in the first place. The White Lotus Society promises economic justice and spiritual enlightenment, which attracts people who are desperate enough to believe that armed rebellion might improve their economic circumstances. Historians still argue whether Chinese economic collapse was inevitable or preventable through different policy choices. But when you're watching your village empty as families flee tax collectors and join rebel movements, academic debates about fiscal policy feel less urgent than immediate survival decisions that require choosing between supporting a corrupt government or joining revolutionary movements led by people whose qualification for leadership consists primarily of being angry about current conditions. Rebellion organization reveals revolutionary planning that makes modern political movements look sophisticated by comparison. Rebel leaders develop strategy through meetings that resemble angry neighborhood associations more than military planning sessions, with tactical decisions based on enthusiasm rather than practical considerations like weapons availability, logistical support, or realistic assessment of imperial military capabilities versus rebel resources and training. The imperial response to rebellion demonstrates governmental crisis management that makes modern counterinsurgency operations look nuanced and psychologically sophisticated by comparison. Imperial forces treat all rural populations as potential rebels, creating security policies that make actual rebellion seem like reasonable career choice compared to continued loyalty to government that regards peasant survival as secondary concern compared to maintaining imperial authority through systematic intimidation. Economic refugees from rural areas flood into cities that cannot absorb sudden population increases, creating urban conditions that make modern homelessness look like temporary housing shortage rather than permanent social catastrophe. Displaced farmers compete for employment opportunities that don't exist, while cities struggle to provide basic services to populations that exceed infrastructure capacity by margins that make urban planning impossible rather than merely difficult. Social order breaks down as traditional authority structures prove inadequate for managing economic crisis that exceeds anything contemplated by classical governmental theory. Local magistrates abandon their posts. Wealthy families flee to safer regions, and community leaders who maintain social stability during normal times discover that crisis conditions require skills and resources that classical education and administrative experience don't provide. Regional variation in economic collapse creates patchwork of conditions that make national policy impossible and local solutions inadequate for problems that exceed local capacity for resolution. Some provinces maintain relative stability while others dissolve into chaos, creating internal refugee movements that spread economic problems across regions that had previously avoided the worst effects of imperial fiscal mismanagement. Military costs of suppressing rebellion consume resources that could theoretically address underlying economic problems, creating governmental spending priorities that make military solutions seem more practical than economic reform despite obvious logic suggesting that addressing root causes might be more effective than treating symptoms through violence. It's crisis management that treats revolution as military problem rather than symptom of governmental failure requiring systemic reform. International implications of Chinese internal chaos attract foreign attention that makes domestic problems seem simple by comparison to geopolitical complications that arise when major civilizations collapse in ways that affect regional stability, trade relationships, and territorial boundaries. Foreign powers begin positioning themselves to benefit from Chinese weakness while claiming to offer assistance with humanitarian motives that don't quite explain their sudden interest in Chinese port cities and natural resources. Economic innovation driven by crisis conditions creates new commercial arrangements that make traditional business practices look rigid and unable to adapt to changing conditions. Merchants develop barter systems, alternative currencies, and trading networks that bypass imperial taxation and regulation, demonstrating entrepreneurial creativity that emerges when existing economic structures prove inadequate for actual economic activity. As rebellions spread and economic collapse accelerates, you witness something that seemed impossible just decades earlier: the systematic dissolution of an imperial system that had governed China for over 2,000 years. The Qing dynasty, which once ruled the largest empire in human history, now struggles to control territories that would fit comfortably within a single province. While foreign powers circle like vultures around a civilization that's collapsing in slow motion with the inexorable momentum of geological processes. The Opium Wars reveal the true cost of China's isolation from technological innovation that characterized the rest of the world during centuries when Chinese emperors considered foreign knowledge inferior to classical wisdom. British warships arrive equipped with steam engines, rifled firearms, and naval artillery that make Chinese military technology look like museum displays from earlier centuries. Your nation's proud isolation transforms into fatal disadvantage when isolation means technological stagnation during periods of rapid global advancement. Foreign concessions establish extraterritorial zones within Chinese cities where foreign laws apply to foreign nationals, creating legal arrangements that make Chinese sovereignty seem theoretical rather than actual within your own country. Shanghai develops international settlements where Chinese people require permission to enter, while British, French, and American authorities exercise governmental power over Chinese territory with a casual confidence of people who understand that military superiority translates directly into political authority. The Taiping Rebellion demonstrates how internal chaos provides opportunities for foreign intervention disguised as humanitarian assistance. European powers offer military support to imperial forces fighting rebels, but their assistance comes with commercial agreements, territorial concessions, and treaty obligations that make Chinese independence seem increasingly fictional. It's foreign aid that costs more than the problems it supposedly solves, paid through surrendering sovereignty in installments that eventually total complete subordination. Technological demonstrations by foreign visitors reveal the extent of China's technological isolation in ways that make centuries of imperial confidence look tragically misguided. Steam engines, telegraphs, firearms, and industrial machinery represent capabilities that China cannot replicate, purchase, or effectively counter using traditional methods. Your civilization discovers it has been living in technological time capsule, while the rest of the world develop capabilities that make Chinese technological achievements look quaint and essentially irrelevant. Historians still argue whether Chinese decline was inevitable or could have been prevented through different policy choices. But when you're watching foreign soldiers patrol Chinese streets, while Chinese officials serve as administrators for foreign commercial interests, academic debates about alternative historical possibilities feel less relevant than immediate reality of national humiliation that makes previous Chinese pride seem embarrassingly naive. Treaty negotiations reveal diplomatic processes that make modern international relations look equitable and respectful by comparison. China signs agreements that cede territory, establish foreign commercial privileges, and accept legal arrangements that favor foreign interests, while Chinese negotiators operate from positions of military weakness that make meaningful negotiation impossible. Its diplomacy conducted at gunpoint, with treaties that formalize Chinese subordination through legal language that makes occupation seem voluntary. Commercial penetration transforms Chinese markets from protected domestic economy into colonial appendage of foreign industrial systems that treat China as source of raw materials and consumer market for manufactured goods produced elsewhere. Traditional Chinese industries collapse under competition from factory-produced foreign alternatives that cost less and often work better than products made using methods that had remained unchanged for centuries because change was considered unnecessary improvement on perfection. Educational missions bring foreign ideas that challenge fundamental assumptions about Chinese civilization that had seemed self-evidently superior to foreign alternatives. Western science, technology, medicine, and political theory offer solutions to problems that Chinese traditional knowledge cannot address effectively, creating intellectual crisis that makes traditional Chinese confidence in cultural superiority seem increasingly untenable when foreign methods prove more effective for addressing practical problems. Military modernization attempts reveal the difficulty of adopting foreign technology without accepting foreign organizational methods, training systems, and strategic thinking that contradict traditional Chinese approaches to warfare and governmental administration. China attempts to purchase modern weapons while maintaining traditional military culture, creating hybrid systems that combine foreign technology with Chinese methods in ways that work poorly for both technological and cultural reasons. Political reform movements emerge from recognition that traditional Chinese governmental systems cannot effectively address challenges created by foreign pressure and internal chaos. But reform attempts encounter resistance from traditional authorities who understand that meaningful political change would eliminate their power and social status. It's governmental reform that threatens the people responsible for implementing reform, creating political dynamics that make meaningful change nearly impossible. Cultural identity crises develop as Chinese intellectuals struggle to maintain pride in Chinese civilization while acknowledging that foreign cultures have developed capabilities that Chinese civilization lacks. Traditional Chinese confidence in cultural superiority conflicts with obvious evidence that foreign methods work better for addressing practical problems, creating psychological stress that makes national identity seem problematic rather than source of pride and confidence. Regional warlords emerge as central imperial authority weakens, creating political fragmentation that makes national unity seem impossible to maintain through traditional methods, while foreign powers exploit Chinese disunity by supporting different factions that compete for local control rather than national unity. It's political decentralization that makes Chinese weakness permanent by preventing coordinated response to foreign pressure and internal challenges. Economic dependence on foreign trade and investment transforms China from self-sufficient empire into subordinate economy that cannot function independently of foreign commercial relationships that favor foreign interests while providing Chinese people with employment opportunities that require accepting inferior status within economic systems controlled by foreign authorities. It's economic modernization that makes Chinese independence seem increasingly unrealistic and probably impossible to achieve. The final imperial sunset comes not with dramatic collapse, but with gradual irrelevance, as traditional Chinese institutions prove inadequate for addressing modern challenges, while foreign alternatives demonstrate superior effectiveness for solving practical problems that Chinese traditional methods cannot handle. You're witnessing the end of a civilization that lasted longer than most others in human history, dissolving not through conquest, but through obsolescence that makes previous Chinese achievements seem impressive, but ultimately insufficient for survival in a changed world. As you drift deeper into sleep tonight, let the weight of Imperial China's complexities settle gently around you like silk curtains closing on a vast historical stage. You've journeyed through centuries where survival required navigating social hierarchies more intricate than palace gardens, where a single misstep could transform you from respected citizen into social outcast faster than seasons change from spring to winter. Picture yourself now, safely removed from those dangerous streets, where every conversation carried potential consequences. Every meal might be your last decent food for months, and every sunrise brought fresh challenges that would test limits you never knew you possessed. The examination halls fade into distant memory, their bamboo desks and impossible questions dissolving like morning mist over ancient mountains. Let go of the tension from dodging corrupt officials, avoiding plague-carrying rats, and memorizing classical texts that determined your entire future through 3 days of writing that could make or break generations of family aspirations. Feel your modern worries seem lighter by comparison, your daily challenges more manageable than navigating a world where breathing the wrong way might violate imperial protocol. The opium dens empty, their sweet smoke clearing to reveal clean air you can breathe without fear of addiction or social destruction. The rebellion drums fade to silence, replaced by the gentle rhythm of your own peaceful heartbeat. Even the most tyrannical imperial bureaucrats transform into harmless shadows, their power dissolved by centuries that separate their world from your safe, comfortable present. Rest now in the knowledge that you've survived this journey through one of history's most complex civilizations, emerging with appreciation for modern conveniences that Imperial Chinese subjects could never have imagined. Close your eyes and let the ancient empire fade into the realm of dreams, where even the most challenging historical periods become simply stories that help us understand how far humanity has traveled from those difficult, dangerous, yet fascinating times. Sweet dreams, time traveler. You've earned this rest.